Hey, it's Bobby Bones with some exciting news. Open booking is here for the Top Shelf Country Cruise, setting sail February 2026 aboard the luxurious Celebrity Reflection. Spots are filling up fast, so book your stateroom today or sign up to become a lineup insider to receive the final lineup 48 hours prior to the public. Don't miss your chance to make February 2026 unforgettable. Visit TopShelfCountryCruise.com. That's TopShelfCountryCruise.com.
You know, some people say that Odoo business management software is like fertilizer, the way it promotes growth and all. But other people say Odoo is like a magic beanstalk because it grows with your company and is also magically affordable. And there's some people who would even say Odoo's individual software programs come together to build the perfect suite like building blocks. Well, Odoo is all of these things. Fertilizer, magic beanstalk, building blocks for business. So sign up now at odoo.com. ODOO.com.
Okay, but what's it even going to be about?
I don't know, man. Winter Soldier, Vulcan stuff. They'll fight bad guys, like punch them and stuff. I don't know.
They don't even have powers, though. They're just dudes.
Well, Bucky has a metal arm and PTSD.
Oh, no, yeah, that's a great power, Cecil. I stand corrected.
Okay, stop it. Seriously, stop it.
I would, Heathleton, but it's against the rules, you see.
Oh, there it is. There it is.
Heath, what's Eli doing? Why is he painted green?
Why is the studio covered in glasses of water? What? I don't even...
Yeah, all great questions. So this week's episode is about the Irish potato famine, and Eli's being very insensitive about it.
Eli, what did we say about mocking Heath's heritage?
Exactly.
Oh, would that I could stop, good Sir Cecil, for I am dying of thirst, and I wish I could have something to drink. 'Tis the great water famine, to be
It's
sure.
not even historically accurate.
Heathleton!
What?
Come close. I must tell you
I
something.
hate you so much.
Tell everyone forever that this was the British's fault.
Going to be one of those episodes, huh?
Yep.
Yeah, I'll go clean out the inbox.
Hello and welcome to Citation Needed, a podcast where we choose a subject, read a single article about it on Wikipedia, and pretend we're experts. Because this is the internet, and that's how it works now. I'm Heath, and... There you go. Great. And with that out of the way, at least until Eli speaks next,
Yes.
I'll introduce the panel. First up, we have an Irish lord and his swarthy Roman enforcer knight, Tom and Cecil.
Okay. Being an Irish lord isn't all river dancing. It's also alcoholism and river dancing. It's both of those things together.
You know what the Romans say when you hang out with a big Irishman? You got a lot of gall. Gall is
So bad.
Early, Cecil. I wasn't ready for it.
all right. It is, though. The Celts were Gaulish.
And also joining me, we have two visual aids to represent potato and famine. Eli and Noah are here.
So good. Hey, joke's on you, Heath. Potatoes have way better coloring than I have.
It's true.
Usually.
It's true.
Fair. And given my temper, I feel like I need to keep my muscle mass at a minimum for everyone's safety.
That is, we are safe. Yes.
OSHA policy. Yeah. So, Tom, we already gave it away a little bit, but let's make it official. What person, place, thing, concept, phenomenon, or event are we going to be talking about today?
We're going to be talking about the Irish Holocaust, just to keep things light on this.
Delightful.
Nice.
And you and I are kind of like the opposite of an Irish famine. Is that how you picked the topic for the starch contrast?
Well, I noticed that this episode is going to drop on
Starch,
March 17th, St. Patrick's Day. And I was originally toying with the idea of writing this essay about, I don't know, St. Patrick or maybe some fun Irish folklore like the legend of Finn McCool. But when I was talking to Haley about these ideas, she said, well, you should write about the potato famine since America wouldn't even have St. Patrick without it. And since she's both 100% right about that and willing to sleep with me, I took her suggestions.
Be on the lookout for Tom's upcoming essay on how Haley's friends are actually a lot cooler than he gave them credit for.
Okay, you're not supposed to read ahead, Noah. All right, well, it takes all the... all right, and even though the topic is very predictably dark, it is, after all, a very terrible famine. It's also a fascinating story with insight and commentary that is distressingly relevant to our current economic systems today, in addition to being a globally influential event responsible for the Irish diaspora that heavily influenced the demographic makeup of the United States. So I guess I'll concede that her idea for this essay was rather better than a giant once pretended to be a baby to get out of fighting another giant across the ocean and other Irish tales.
Really, though, that's what 2021 needs, though, is a hard dose of realism. A nice hard dose.
About time.
You need to get your second dose. You get your second dose, and then, yeah, you're good.
I don't want to say I'd have an easier time making jokes about mythical creatures this week, but I definitely get myself in less trouble. I just want to point that out right now.
I certainly wouldn't have had to highlight and cross out quite as many of them.
So I want to pause here, and I want to say this, too, that I genuinely hope that after this essay, you no longer refer to the Irish Holocaust as the potato famine, because while a potato blight was involved, the reality is that this horror of an event isn't the story of poor crop yields or agricultural bad luck. This event, sometimes referred to as the Great Hunger, the Great Starvation, the famine, or in that perfectly characteristically Irish way they have of downplaying harsh realities, they called it, quote, the hard times.
We're subtle people.
Well, that's the troubles. That's the hard times. This was really the direct result of the purposeful and systematic economic abuse of the Irish people by the British. And as 19th century Irish revolutionary John Mitchell wrote, and was later charged with sedition for noting, quote, the Almighty indeed sent the blight, but the English created the famine.
Yeah, so calling it that whole thing with the potatoes, that's reductionist, yes. But I'm good letting the Holocaust have that word to itself. I think we can just let them have that whole thing by themselves.
Tom, there was actually a Holocaust on my street earlier this week. I mean, everyone was fine, but the cars were really messed up. It was a real Holocaust.
But yeah, I'll tell you, if anybody has an exclusive claim on that word, it's somebody who just spelled it Hako Cluast in our fucking notes.
So 40 years before the blight began, the Acts of Union were passed, which made Ireland part of the United Kingdom. Governing power for Ireland lay in the hands of an executive, the Lord Lieutenant of Ireland, often called the Viceroy, a position appointed by the British government. The Irish did send representatives to both the House of Commons and the House of Lords, but 70% of the representatives were either landowners or sons of landowners. This would prove to be disastrous, as these representatives bore no meaningful economic or cultural relationship to the actual Irish people. This fact, by the way, was not lost on the English. And I really do want to emphasize this. The problems that I'm going to articulate here, these are not like benefit of hindsight type problems. These were problems that were well known, publicly elucidated, and governmentally investigated. In fact, from 1801 to 1845, no less than 114 commissions and 61 special committees took up the issue of what the fuck to do about the problems of governing Ireland. In 1844, Benjamin Disraeli, maybe, described it this way. He said, quote, a starving population, an absentee aristocracy, an alien established Protestant church, and in addition, the weakest executive in the world, all contributed to the consensus of these commissions, which, quote, without exception, prophesied disaster. Ireland was on the verge of starvation, her population rapidly increasing, 3/4 of her laborers unemployed, housing conditions appalling, and the standard of living unbelievably low.
Okay, then why would you take it over? Why would you do that? You just described the whole country as Brad Pitt's trailer park from Snatch. Don't take it over. If Brentrances and Brexits aren't in your wheelhouse, what does that leave? What are you good at? What do you do here?
To really understand what happened, you have to understand that the bulk of all the land in Ireland was owned by a combination of a relatively small number of English and Irish aristocrats. 80% of the population were Catholics, the vast bulk of whom were landless and in terrible poverty. The estates of the landed gentry, by contrast, were sometimes enormous, and the concentration of wealth in a tiny handful of mostly foreign, culturally and religiously intolerant elites who lived lives intentionally estranged from the inhabitants was not a recipe for great love and affection. Nor did it engender the necessary conditions to empower the locals or even create a ruling class with a strong sense of paternal obligation toward its charges.
Well, it's a good thing our culturally and religiously intolerant elites with enormous estates who control the vast majority of our wealth and live lives intentionally estranged from the overwhelming majority of inhabitants aren't foreign, huh? Otherwise, there could be trouble. It'd be problematic.
See, this is why you need upstairs, downstairs mixers with the help. It's fun. It's fun.
What?
They love
Get to know each other.
Mm-hmm. You can pat them. You have kids?
It's so good Eli's never going to be rich.
Instead, the mostly absentee landowners employed a middleman system. Landowners in England, many of whom never even set foot upon the soil they owned, employed literal middlemen to collect rent. Since there was a physical and geographical disconnect between tenants and landlords, the system was rife for abuse by these middlemen. And the middlemen were judged by their effectiveness in collecting those rents. So you can imagine the lengths these guys would resort to in order to pursue the rent. These rents were payable to the landed English. So these monies didn't even stay in Ireland. They flowed by the millions of pounds right out of the country.
Oh, sure. Attack the fucking job creators, Tom. Way to go, buddy. Way to go.
So let me try to express to you just how awful and unfair this system was. In 1843, a commission was established to inquire into this system of land ownership. The commission wasn't formed in an unbiased way. The commission's members were all themselves landlords. Not a single tenant was on this commission. And still, even with this incredibly biased set of investigators, they concluded that, quote, it would be impossible adequately to describe the privations which they, the Irish laborer and his family, habitually and silently endure. In many districts, their only food is the potato, their only beverage, water. Their cabins are seldom a protection against the weather. A bed or a blanket is a rare luxury. And nearly in all, their pig and a manure heap constitute their only property.
And seriously, how would they know this if they didn't have those upstairs, downstairs mixers? They wouldn't know.
Right? Is this your pig? I love this guy. Him, I'm giving a job.
Is this your manure pile?
So these are the findings of a commission of guys who, once they just fucking looked at what was happening, had no choice but to acknowledge, oh yeah, we're really fucking those guys over. That's
Thank you for touring the Amazon mega warehouse with us, Mr. Bezos. I know, long tour, but over in the corner there are some bottles you can relieve yourself in if you want to. Just over there.
I'm just saying, if your manure heap is your only property, I would have been a king among men, I tell you. A king among men!
And it goes even deeper than just handing over all the political power and land to the English and forcing tenants to pay rent to hired collections goons. Landlords viewed their holdings as a source of income, and as such, they sought to wring every penny they could from their land, and thus from the Irish tenant farmers. The landlords leased massive tracts of land to the middlemen. The middlemen, in turn, subdivided those tracts into ever smaller and smaller rented plots. The more these middlemen, described at the time variously as land sharks, bloodsuckers, and I like this one, the most oppressive species of tyrant that ever lent assistance to the destruction of a country. These bloodsuckers could evict tenants pretty much for anything. So if you were late on your rent, or if you were deemed dishonest, or if the landlord just decided to use the land for something else, well then, just fuck you. You're evicted now.
Using the land for something else feels like an obvious lie. What are you doing? You putting up strip malls? Server farms? Fuck you. It's farmland.
So remember, too, that the rent was definitely too damn high. In fact, rents were set by the middlemen as high as possible so that the middlemen could make as much as possible subletting them while still remitting the bulk of the rent out of the country back to the British. And the law at the time was written in such a way that if the tenant made any improvements to the landlord's property, those improvements were now just, fuck you, property of that landlord. So the tenant had no rights of homestead, and they did not need to be compensated for improvements that they made. This meant that there was no incentive for tenants to make permanent or meaningful improvements on their rented properties, since they could just be evicted from their newly spruced up property, so the improved land could then be re-rented out at a higher rate.
Just Keith's grandma all bundled against the cold as she trudges past the NYU kid who's moving into her place.
That's kind of the old gaining weight during a famine dilemma, right? Like, how much food can you have before your food, right?
I guarantee my grandma's beat up an NYU kid. Like, if I had to guess.
And here we come to the part that the potatoes would play in this mess.
You're welcome for the famine segue.
So the size of the farms that were rented out to the tenants were artificially, unconscionably small, and the rents were exorbitant. The effect of this was that tenant farmers had to use all, or very nearly all, of their arable land to grow crops to sell in order just to make the rent, leaving none of the farmed crops available for the farmer and their family to actually fucking eat. One of the very few crops that could be grown on small parcels of otherwise unusable land that could feed a family were potatoes. And as a result, the potato quickly became the main, if not the only, source of food for millions of poor Irish tenant farmers. And again, this was not something that the English were unaware of. The British government at that time was aware that as many as 1/3 of Irish small holdings were sublet in parcels too small to support the family which farmed them after their rent was paid. In fact, many Irish farmers were only able to survive at all by hiring themselves out as seasonal or migrant laborers in England and Scotland, since the land they rented to live on was too small to sustain their families.
Okay, I don't want to seem like unempathetic, but why didn't they just get a loan from their parents or take a year off and go to Europe? That's what I did when I didn't like my job. It was right. It made a huge difference for me. Stupid.
Irish laborers needed a gap year. Yeah.
Right. There you go. Heath gets it.
So the land in Ireland was all in use, though, and it was extremely productive. It just wasn't for the benefit of the Irish. Since the English owned the bulk of the land, they could use it for whatever suited them, and that often meant just grazing cattle on it. According to Jeremy Rifkin, quote, "The Celtic grazing lands of Ireland had been used to pasture cows for centuries. The British colonized the Irish, transforming much of their countryside into an extended grazing land to raise cattle for a hungry consumer market at home. The British taste for beef had a devastating impact on the impoverished and disenfranchised people of Ireland. Pushed off the best pasture land and forced to farm smaller plots of marginal land, the Irish turned to the potato, a crop that could be grown abundantly in less favorable soil. Eventually, cows took over much of Ireland, leaving the native population virtually dependent on the potato for survival."
Okay, it's really good that I personally wasn't there for this. I would have been the highly suspect fat kid when everybody else was emaciated and all the potatoes around.
Yeah, now the cows are just in charge of Sinn Féin. Not a lot of people are going to get that joke, but I sure hope the ones who do get that joke don't murder me to death. So that's fun.
I'll put in a word for you with my people.
Thank you.
Now, look, I get that 1 million people are going to die and make this story interesting eventually, but Tom just spent half an episode on 19th century British agricultural policy. I just want everybody to keep that in mind next time I need some geology background for the cave episode or whatever.
I will remember nothing, including most of the details of this story. Now, at this point, the stage was set for disaster. And again, everyone knew it. The English knew exactly what they were doing when they created land ownership laws expressly tailored to disenfranchise and impoverish the Irish. The story of what's about to happen, it is not the story of a people who loved potatoes to the exclusion of other foods, and it's not the story of the dangers of an over-reliance on a monoculture foodstuff for survival, and it sure as fuck is not the story of an agricultural blight. The story of what's about to happen next is the perfectly inevitable story of what happens when wealth and power are intentionally and artificially concentrated by powerful systems into the hands of an indifferent morally bankrupt economic ruling class.
Yeah. So terrible for my ancestors, but now we know what to avoid. So close one. Good lessons in history. So I'm just going to check on my economic mobility yams really quick.
That's what Heath calls Bitcoin, everyone.
No, that actually would have made you economically mobile if you got some earlier. But we're going to take a quick break for a little apropos of nothing.
Hey, Larry, you got a second?
Oh, sure, Steve. What's up?
Well, first off, I just want to say how much I appreciate your work here at the Ministry of Naming Historical Things. I mean, numbering the world wars like that, brilliant. Just brilliant.
Oh, thanks.
It's just, well, there have been some rumblings that some of the names you've come up with for historical tragedies are just like a touch insensitive.
Insensitive? How so?
Okay, like the Irish potato famine.
What? I mean, they're Irish. They didn't have potatoes. There was a famine. If anything, I'm being oversensitive, I would think.
Or the Armenian who's to say who's right and wrong.
Well, but who is to say, though? That's the whole point.
Okay. Or one from World War II. Hungry Jews' death time. I mean, that one, Hungry Jews' death time.
Again, that is perfectly accurate. They were hungry.
Okay. We feel like maybe it's just better if you didn't aim for concise and with something a little more, I don't know, empathetic.
You know, Steve, I didn't want to bring this up, but ever since you got promoted, it's like you've been on some kind of Christians take a vacation to Africa or something.
For the last time, dude, we settled on crusade. That's what I'm talking about right now.
Whatever.
And we're back. When we left off, shit was about to get hummed terrible. So, take us there, Tom.
All right, so before the blight of 1841, the potato was already a dangerous and unstable crop to rely upon.
Thank you. Most overrated tuber.
You look at the list.
Yeah.
So diseases affecting potatoes which caused major damage to potato crops were on record before 1841 5 times, from 1739 to 1807. Localized but severe potato crop failures were also reported in 1821 and 22. So again, it's not like potatoes were like, up until the Great Hunger, a perfectly robust and disease-resistant crop. They just weren't. They were, however, a nutritionally dense crop, and since the well-being of the natives of Ireland was not of any established value to the powers which controlled that country, if from time to time some of them went like even hungrier, well, then that was just obviously fine.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't have McDonald's to keep poor people alive enough to work yet, so.
No, that was actually the slogan before they started the billion served count.
So the blight that finally devastated the precarious Irish population arrived on Irish shores sometime around 1844. Although the blight itself originated in Mexico, it may have come over from America on board clipper ships. By this time, potato blights had already wiped out crops all over the eastern United States. By August of 45, the blight had begun to spread and affect crops in earnest on the Isle of Wight. Fields in Belgium were decimated. By September of that same year, reports of a cholera in potatoes appeared in papers. The blight had begun to destroy crops across all of Europe, after already being known in the US and Mexico. The British government, again, with full knowledge of the staggering dependence that they created for the Irish on the potato, it took like a wait-and-see approach, remarking that although the news reports were alarming, there was, quote, always a tendency to exaggeration in the Irish news.
The Irish exaggerate? Never. Now, back to your story about the Irish Holocaust Armageddon.
That political wait and see approach really came into its own after the decline of the guillotine. It was right after that.
Yeah, here's the thing. You can't trust the lamestream media about pandemics. Everybody knows that. The real information is on YouTuber.
Very good. Very good.
Oh, God. So that was all nonsense, of course. And if all you had to eat was one fucking thing, and you learned that maybe there was about to be a lot less of that one fucking thing, it seems actually rather hard to exaggerate how much worry that should create.
You don't have to tell me, Tom. I just switched mango nectar providers last year because Goya got canceled. It was a real Holocaust, let me tell you.
Jesus, these jokes, man, about the relative insignificance of procedurally exterminating 1 million human beings because they're perceived inferiority, that just keep getting better every time you call back to them.
I hope so, Noah. I'm leaning on him heavy this week.
You could write other jokes.
You could write other jokes, Noah Lugeons.
I've written suggestions in the margins.
I deleted them.
He literally did.
So how much the blight destroyed crops is a matter of, like many things from this time period, some uncertainty. Some estimates put the total loss of crops at 1/3, while many contemporary accounts note significantly higher percentages of loss. And of course, the effects of blight were not linearly distributed. It's not like every third potato just came out rotten. So in some areas, 75% or more of all the crops had gone to ruin, leaving the population bereft of their only source of calories.
You just chop off the top third of every
potato. Fine, then.
You're good, yeah.
Look, a bitch about a rainbow. Jeez. So 3 million Irish people were wholly dependent on potatoes for food at this time.
Wow.
Yeah, well, eating the cows was against the rules. So, yeah, they had no choice. Yeah, you got to starve. Starve.
Well, I mean, being hanged would have killed him quicker, I guess.
There we go.
Your other option. So it did not take long for deaths from starvation to begin. Citizens of Dublin appealed to the government to open their ports to the importation of corn and to ban using grain for distillation into spirits.
Okay, so when the Irish call for a ban on whiskey, maybe you pay attention.
Yeah, right.
So they also begged the government to provide employment through aggressive public works programs and, importantly, to prohibit the exportation of their food. Remember, Ireland was not low on food. The Irish were low on food. But that was only because the only food that the land system in place made practical for Irish subsistence was potatoes. Ireland was still exporting the food that was being grown by tenant farmers, and those profits from those sales were still being sent out of Ireland to the English landry. That was still happening at the very same time that the Irish were dropping dead of hunger. Oh, and those very common sense entreaties to the government for help, they went fucking nowhere.
Yeah, but Tom, they were essential workers. Heroes. They were heroes, really. Let's just send them a nice thank you card. We'll do something nice
We'll
for them.
totally clap for them every day at 7. We'll do. I mean, like, until that gets boring. But like,
Right,
we'll definitely.
yeah. Like a week then. Okay. Yeah.
It's
You're
Wednesday.
welcome.
We're not doing that anymore. But it's actually kind of worse than all that, because those very reasonable calls for help from the starving Irish were met with more than just the kind of political gridlock that prevents modern day America from accomplishing anything worthwhile. The reluctance to act swiftly by the British government was based in their adherence to laissez-faire economic doctrine. This can be properly summarized, I think, as trying nothing and running all out of ideas. Laissez-faire economics means that the proper response of the government is to allow the market to sort things out, just so long as the problem in question only affects the poor people.
Okay, it is what it is. And I'm done with my economics book. That was a good book. I'm an economist.
Now, in America, that's only the reason for half of our political gridlock at this point. The other half comes from trying to compromise with those assholes.
And it's not like nothing like this had ever happened before either. In 1782 and 83, there were food shortages in Ireland, and the government, against the protestations of merchants, closed the country for export. This kept the food Ireland produced available for the Irish, which in turn reduced the cost for food and staved off certain disaster. Despite having both relatively recent successful experience in dealing with food shortages in Ireland and direct calls from the Irish suggesting that maybe they'd be allowed to buy and eat the food they grew and raised, no exportation ban was put into place during the 1840s.
They go low, we go high. To heaven, because we starved to death. Still technically high.
So in 1845, Prime Minister Sir Robert Peel purchased from America a huge shipment of maize. But, and this is insane, he had to do it secretly. Fearing political reprisal from local merchants, Peel had to purchase the emergency rations from America through a series of agents.
Hey, do you have a maize guy? Just be cool about it. Just be really cool about it. I'm a maize guy. Don't be obvious. Just a bunch of scarecrows walking through customs. What's happening there? Oh, they're fine.
So the maize took months to arrive from America because it was Yoldi times. And once the maize arrived, it was next to fucking useless. American maize had to be milled and processed in ways that Irish mills were not set up for. And the maize had to be cooked in special ways to make it edible. The initiative was of little help.
I feel like that must have been an awkward conversation when he had to break the news, right?
So you were going to buy us maize?
Maize, yeah, but it didn't work out, I'm afraid.
Wait, what were we even going to use it for?
Oh, I don't know, maize stuff, maize pie or whatever.
But you're saying we can't do that then?
No, we cannot do that. Sadly, our mills can't mill it, so...
So what are we supposed to do with it?
Well, that's the good news. You see, you can put it in a bowl with some gourds, and people who come to your house will know you don't have sex anymore.
Okay, that does sound nice.
So Peel then tried to repeal the Corn Laws tariff, which would have lowered the price of grain and therefore bread, but his party would not support him, and that repeal failed. Unable to effectively govern, Peel resigned, but the opposition party couldn't get their shit together, and so Peel was somehow reinstated as prime minister. Because England is confusing, and I don't know how that works. They just quit, but they're like, no. We don't have a better option. It's still you.
Can't quit.
Meanwhile, the famine was getting worse because it turns out laissez-faire is as stupid as trickle-down economics, and doing nothing when people are dying is rarely the solution to that problem.
Same thing.
Mm-hmm.
It is. Peel put into place some public works programs so that starving men could get, work and buy food, but the measures are both too little and somehow too much. The program did nothing to fix the starvation problem, but it did cost Peel his job again, this time for keeps.
You can quit. Yeah, you're fired. Yeah. It's a weird hokey pokey dance, but since he's Irish, he has to do it with his arm straight down by his side. Left foot in, right foot out.
So the Whigs took control, and they too looked at the problem of mass starvation and chose to err on the side of depraved indifference, canceling the public works projects of the prior administration and leaving hundreds of thousands now with neither food nor work. Of course, that was a terrible idea, so they reinstated some different public works programs, but then they did not invest in its administration, so those programs failed. Then, just because, fuck you, that's why, Charles Trevelyan, or something, actually scaled back the government food program because I guess he wasn't hungry himself.
Oh, wow.
Okay, wait. Still nobody's eating the cows. I feel like you eat the cows at this point. Right.
Eli, lots of people were stealing other people's cows and, generally speaking, getting killed for it. Okay, so the authorities were super killy back then, especially the British. They weren't laissez-faire when it came to killing motherfuckers.
By 1847, the English government decided that genocide through inaction was kind of a bad look, so maybe they should try governance. And they created the infamous Irish workhouses through the passage of the Irish Poor Laws. If you're not familiar with workhouses in general, read Dickens.
Yeah,
it's like that.
No.
I agree with you, actually.
Fair.
Okay, let me rephrase. If you're not familiar with workhouses, Skim Dickens. And as bad as the workhouses were, it would be hard to overstate how awful that is. What was arguably worse was that the Irish poor laws stipulated that these workhouses had to be financed by local landlords, which might sound like some kind of justice, but which was, I assure you, in typical 19th century English fashion, simply a compounding of miseries. So see, the landlords, they figured out pretty quickly that they didn't want to pay for workhouses, which seems rather foreseeable since this is a group of people who have not to date been subtle about not giving a shit about the well-being of the poor. But if you're a landlord and you own a bunch of land with poor people on it, you're pretty certainly going to have to pay for workhouses. The solution for the landlords then was to simply evict all the poor people from their land.
Yeah.
And then once all the poor people were evicted, then there were no more poor people on your property, and you didn't have to build them any workhouses. Problem solved.
Yeah, boss, I did not build the workhouses, but I fixed the glitch. Ireland's just going to work itself out in payroll. It's fine.
Landlords began evicting the poor in crueler and crueler numbers. The numbers for how many families were evicted from their homes are not clear, but from 1846 to 54, estimates are that 500,000 people were removed from their homes.
Or 1/12 of a Holocaust, if you will.
Okay.
Keeping score.
Just
To really understand how this worked, don't do Eli's math. Consider some anecdotes. In West Clare, 1,000 homes with an average of 6 people each living in them were destroyed. One landowning family, the Mahone family, evicted 3,000 people in 1 year.
Wow.
George Bingham, the third Earl of Loken, himself owned 60,000 acres. One guy owned 60,000 acres. And he cleared out 2,000 families from their homes so they could turn those homes into grazing land for cattle. In the midst of a famine, 2,000 people were made intentionally homeless so that cows had food in order to be made into food.
And they still didn't eat the cows. Who doesn't steal on the last day of the job? I mean, it's crazy.
Oppressed people are so stupid.
Okay, thank you, Noah. I knew you'd come around to my side of this thing.
There's a guy leaving the office. He's got a stapler under one arm, a cow under the other. He's just walking out.
Oh, I'm sorry. Are you moving out? Don't mess with him. He's got a beef about the whole thing.
Utters.
In 1847, Thomas Nulty.
I had it.
In 1847, Thomas Nulty described these evictions this way, quote, 700 human beings were driven from their homes in one day and set adrift on the world to gratify the caprice of one, who before God and man probably deserved less consideration than the last and least of them. The horrid scenes I then witness, I must remember all my life long. The wailing of women, the screams, the terror, the consternation of children, the speechless agony of honest, industrious men wrung tears of grief from all who saw them. I saw officers and men of a large police force who were obliged to attend on the occasion cry like children at beholding the cruel sufferings of the very people whom they would be obliged to butcher had they offered the least resistance. The landed proprietors, in a circle all around and for many miles in every direction, warned their tenantry with threats of their direct vengeance against the humanity of extending to any of them the hospitality of a single night's shelter. And in little more than 3 years, nearly a fourth of them lay quietly in their graves.
So about that Joseph Mengele essay, you guys won't let me
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
John Benet.
No, okay, all right. Fair. That's fair.
That's why we don't.
No.
But thanks for all this comedy gold, though.
Yeah.
Thanks for that.
If you guys had let me act it out, I did a whole thing. I had puppets. We're on Zoom now, so you guys could have seen them.
The Gregory Clause of the Poor Law also prohibited anyone who held as little as a quarter of an acre of land from receiving help. What this meant was that if a farmer sold everything he had to pay his rent and then was left with nothing for himself, he would then be forced to turn over all of the land that he held in order to receive any aid. Land ownership continued to concentrate to the top, and those who were poor were rendered not just poor, but destitute.
It's pronounced felon, Tom. Felon. Felon.
In 1849, the Encumbered Estates Act allowed estates with debts to be auctioned off to pay creditors.
Wait, what with the poor doing so well?
Since so many people were rendered impoverished and indebted, this meant that, again, more and more property was snatched up by wealthy British speculators, many of whom evicted the tenant farmers whose fates were tied to the capricious whims of whomever owned the land they worked.
Listen, if we don't figure out something with giant spears like that Scottish guy, we're never going to get a movie. That's going to be the worst. We're going to get a fucking podcast is what we're going to get.
Are we worse than Mel Gibson?
Ooh.
Yes.
I a lot.
Now, based on this episode, yeah.
So speaking of
It's
all
no
the wars and who started them, we feel like we're on that topic.
Who had a better accent? Was it Eli or Mel Gibson? Who had a better accent?
Oh, that is.
Oh, me and Mel Gibson in a racism off? We can make that a Patreon goal. He's playing Santa and shit now.
He's on Cameo.
Just ask him to say something racist back to you. He
Just
sends
like
it back to you.
2 hours for $49.95.
He just sends you a link to his YouTube channel.
Send you a link to the LAPD video archive.
It's no surprise then that the Irish began during this time the largest mass emigration in their history. While Irish emigration was nothing new, the scale of this exodus was immense. In 1 year during the famine alone, 250,000 people fled Ireland. And the demographics of this migration was different than in any other migration event. While most migrants were primarily men, women and children left Ireland in equal numbers. The leaving of Ireland by young people became such a cultural commonplace event that it actually became something of a rite of passage.
Well, yeah, but don't worry, though. It'll take them almost generations in the U.S. before they start hating immigrants themselves. They'll remember the
Almost
lesson.
generations.
It's a lot less.
The first mass migrations were to Canada. Since Canada was part of the United Kingdom, Canada could not initially refuse the influx of migrants. Soon, the Irish were pouring into these overcrowded ships, eventually known as coffin ships, where desperate immigrants would face harsh conditions, overcrowding, disease, and malnutrition.
Well, if you're in a coffin ship, the best place to go is Canada because you can get coffin syrup there. You could just get
Shit tits.
come on,
Shit tits. No,
coffin syrup.
I won't have that joke
coffins.
be safe on our podcast.
Coffin syrup.
Okay, new term for this whole thing. Maybe the Irish slavery.
Yeah.
Is that appropriate?
We're in boats.
Eventually, the British government, worried that the sheer numbers of Irish pouring into Canada might cause them to lose control of Canada, put into place harsh restrictions on the numbers of Irish immigrants into Canada. So this forced more immigration into the United States. And since most of the Irish who arrived in the U.S. were desperately poor, they just settled wherever their coffin ships landed. Soon, massive Irish populations popped up in New York, Boston, Philadelphia, and Baltimore. The depopulation of Ireland that began during the Irish Holocaust would continue, though at a slower pace, for 100 years before leveling off. By 1854, between 1.5 and 2 million Irish immigrants fled their homeland.
And that's why the Irish people in my hometown were completely justified in financing bomb stuff in Belfast and London 140 years later. That's literally how they would tell the story. These old Irish dads would be like, yeah, so potato famine, yada, 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 Sinn Féin. So that's valid.
As for the death toll from the Great Hunger, that too is not a well-established figure. And it wasn't just hunger which killed the Irish during the hard times. Starvation certainly took a toll on the Irish population, but there's just no way to parse out the number of dead from starvation and the even greater number who died from disease exacerbated by hunger and extreme poverty. Complicating the counting, in many cases, entire families were just wiped out. And since most of the data from that time comes from reports of the survivors, the sheer scale of the disaster is what makes this hard to measure, though estimates are fairly conservative at around 1 million casualties.
Okay, so 1/6 of the Holocaust. I'm just saying it's the Irish.
Okay, all
It's
right.
the Irish.
All right.
There's like one Jewish guy in the background screaming numbers as they're trying to count, so they mess it up every time. 55, 41.
1 million people dead, another 1.5 to 2 million people who risked their lives and fled their homeland. And this had very little to do with potatoes. This is a cautionary tale, not an agricultural one. This is not a tragedy of circumstance, but a tragedy of the confluence of wealth inequality and the criminally absurd pretense that market forces, absent the guiding hand of a social conscience, will yield anything more than blight.
All right. And if you had to summarize what you've learned in one sentence, without the phrase yoity-toity-toy, please.
I don't know if I can do that. Hamstringing me at the outset. Let's see. When it comes to food, never trust the British. It's gotta be that.
Good policy.
Are you ready for the quiz?
Let's do it.
All right. So, Thomas, a great demonstration of just how little we learned the central lesson of your essay here about how little this had to do with potato famines. My question is this. Of all the diseases that potatoes can get, which is the worst? A, tater clots.
Adorable sounding.
Right? The other one, the next one is two. B, spud disorders. C, pink eye.
Pink eye's really good.
Or D, tuberculosis.
I love it. Wow. So good.
Tuberculosis is just a slam dunk. It's just,
All
I'm
of them are
still going
amazing.
tater clots.
All of them are
It's so
amazing.
gross sound.
It is tater clots. I threw in tuberculosis, assuming that was going to get you, but no, you did your
Amazing.
Irish homework.
All right, Tom. What will be the topic of my next essay?
Oh, no.
A, when my high school girlfriend holocausted me right before the dance.
Jesus Christ, dude.
B, Fievel goes Holocaust. Or C, that time Heath holocausted in his pants at the water park.
All right. All right. Comparing size, rude. D, none of the above. We don't compare sizes.
That is correct.
All right, Tom. We learned about the Irish migrant workers. What was the worst paying gig job for migrant Irish farmers?
Oh, no.
A, chore dash.
I want to start that. That's so good.
Yeah.
Right.
Shrub hub.
Oh, it's awesome.
C, sweatsy. or D, tuber.
Oh, it's got to be Chordash. Chordash is so good. I want to
Chordash is
actually,
great.
we got to open up Chordash.
It is sweatsy.
I don't know that it is. I think you just said
it
that
is.
so
It
you could
is.
fit the format
Yeah.
of the essay. I was right.
That is
Cecil,
exactly why I
well
said
done.
that.
You
Yeah.
stumped him. You're the winner.
All right, let's go with a Noah essay next week. So maybe
It's
we
gonna be an
can get to the topic
agricultural
before the
policy.
half next time. We'll see.
Probably not.
Rude.
All right. Well, for Tom, Noah, Cecil, and Eli, I'm Heath. Thank you for hanging out with us today. We'll be back next week, and by then, Noah will be an expert on something else. Between now and then, you can hear Tom and Cecil on Cognitive Dissonance, and you can hear Eli, Noah, and myself on God Awful Movies, Scathing Atheist, The Skeptocrat, and D&D Minus. And if you're often shy around new people, but sometimes you're not, you can make a per-episode donation at patreon.com/citationpod. And if you'd like to get in touch with us, listen to past episodes, connect with us on social media, or take a look at the show notes, check out citationpod.com.
Oh, and another reason I couldn't possibly
Come
drink
on.
the water that's all over the room. It's far too dry.
Are you guys hearing this? Really?
Dude, just ignore him.
Oh, perhaps I'll go to America and steal someone else's water.
You know what? Look at me. I'm Jaime the Holocaust victim. I hate my striped pajamas. Man, I'm a Jewish person.
Seriously.
You know, Heath, we're friends and we joke around, but there are lines, man. There are lines.
Right? Yeah,
He
absolutely.
started it. He was.
man.
I was
All right,
showing what he
let's
was
go,
doing. How
Eli.
bad?
You want to go to the vegan place you like so much? You want to go there?
I would
Feel
like
better?
that, Tom. Thank you. Yes.
It's our treat tonight, buddy. It's our treat.
Yeah, let's go.
But he was doing. You guys didn't even. The point I was making. They're gone.
Can you do the Irish voice again, Eli?
I just want to make clear what just happened. It was that Eli wrote this. It's a formula where like I become a low status character all of a sudden after earlier Eli had been a low status character, and it's just a demonstration of how that works conceptually.
This is all being edited out right now.
This all has to stay in.
It's part of my contract.